All right, let's dive into some of the wildest, most unbelievable U.S. government operations that have ever been declassified. We're talking about stories that sound like they're straight out of a spy movie, but as we're about to see, the official records prove they were all shockingly real.
You hear that question a lot, right? It's usually a fun what if. But what happens when the declassified truth turns out to be even stranger, and honestly, a lot more disturbing than any theory you could dream up? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dig into.
So here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with the huge gap between what the public was told and what was really going on. Then we'll see how these programs targeted folks at home, fought secret wars overseas, and even used the US as a giant test site. And finally, we'll look at the legacy all this secrecy left behind.
Okay, first up, let's talk about the big theme that ties all these stories together, the massive difference between the official story and the secret mission. I mean, what happens when a government's public face is just a mask for what it's really doing behind the scenes?
And here's where it gets really unsettling. Some of these secret operations weren't aimed at foreign enemies at all. They were pointed inward, at the American people themselves. The whole point was to control the story, to shape what you and I thought, said, and believed.
For example, you've got Operation Mockingbird. At the peak of the Cold War, the CIA reportedly had this incredibly bold idea: why not just turn the news media into a weapon for U.S. propaganda? The plan was to secretly recruit journalists, the very people the public relies on for truth, to plant stories and push the CIA's agenda. And the scale of this was just wow. A 1977 report, building on the work of a Senate investigation, alleged that more than 400 American journalists had secretly worked for the CIA. Think about that for a second. That's a huge network, capable of shaping public opinion, not just in the US, but all over the world.
But just manipulating the news wasn't enough. The FBI's COINTELPRO, that's short for Counterintelligence Program, took things to a whole other level. For about 15 years, the FBI ran this secret, and let's be clear, totally illegal program to infiltrate, discredit, and straight up destroy American political groups that it decided were subversive.
And just look at who they targeted. The net they cast was enormous. This wasn't just about one ideology. The FBI went after civil rights activists like Martin Luther King Jr., anti-war protesters, feminist groups. They even went after the KKK. The goal, in the FBI's own chilling words, was to disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize these groups.
And get this wasn't some rogue operation. No, this went all the way to the top. The Attorney General of the United States, Robert F. Kennedy, gave his personal, written sign-off to wiretap Martin Luther King Jr.'s phones. That gave the FBI the green light to listen in on every part of his life.
Now, this level of secrecy wasn't just happening at home. Oh no, it stretched way beyond U.S. borders, where the government was running entire wars and foreign policy missions completely under the table, changing the course of world events without anyone back home having a clue.
The Iran-Contra affair is the perfect example. It's a tangled mess, so stick with me. Officially, the story was that the Reagan administration was secretly selling weapons to Iran, a country under an embargo, to get American hostages released. But the real secret was what they did with the money. They illegally funneled the profits to fund anti-communist rebels, called the Contras, in Nicaragua, directly breaking a law passed by Congress.
This really breaks it down. You have the public story, we're freeing hostages. And then you have the secret reality, we're running an illegal, off-the-books operation to fund a war that Congress had no to. When this all came out, it was a massive, massive scandal.
But not all of these secret wars were about money and weapons. Some were much more direct and much more brutal. Operation Condor was a U.S.-backed campaign where right-wing dictatorships across South America worked together to hunt down, kidnap, and assassinate their political enemies, even across international borders. And the human cost of this, it's hard to even wrap your head around. The official line was that they were fighting subversion. The reality was state-sponsored terror. The victims were students, teachers, union leaders, people from all walks of life. It's estimated that as many as 60,000 people were murdered.
Okay, now we get to what is, for my money, the most chilling part of this whole story. We've seen secrets at home and secrets abroad, but what happens when the government decides to use its own country and its own people as a giant, unwitting science experiment?
And I'm not exaggerating. It was called Operation LAC, which stood for Large Area Coverage. The thinking was, the U.S. Army was afraid of biological warfare,
So they wanted to see how chemical agents would spread if they were released over American cities. So they just did it.
Their method was to fly military planes over huge swaths of the country and spray giant clouds of tiny zinc-cadmium sulfide particles into the air. We're talking 5,000 pounds of this stuff on a single flight. They had ground stations that would then track how far the particles traveled. Sometimes they detected them over 1,200 miles away.
A critic of the program really hit the nail on the head with this quote. The Army was, without anyone's knowledge or consent, literally using the country as a laboratory. Now, the government swore at the time that the chemical was harmless. But guess what? We now know that cadmium compounds are classified as probable human carcinogens.
So what happens when these kinds of secrets finally bubble up to the surface? Well, that's what we'll look at now, the fallout. When these programs were discovered, there was huge public outrage, and it led to some major reforms meant to stop this kind of thing from ever happening again.
Take Project Minaret. For more than 10 years, the NSA had this secret watch list of Americans, and if you were on it, they intercepted your international phone calls and telegrams, all without a warrant. The list had well-known government critics, journalists, and get this, even 2 sitting U.S. senators.
And you can draw a direct line from this kind of abuse to real reform. When Project Minaret and other programs like it were exposed, it created a firestorm. People realized there were basically no legal checks on the government's power to spy on its own citizens. So Congress stepped in and created the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA.
And this is the key takeaway. The whole point of FISA was to create a system of accountability. It set up a special court that would, for the first time, require the government to get a warrant for this kind of domestic surveillance. It was an attempt to make sure the unchecked spying that happened under Project Minaret couldn't happen again.
So, from manipulating the media and fighting secret wars to spying on citizens and conducting human experiments, the declassified record is just full of shocking history. And it leaves us with a really important question for today. In this age of instant information, how many secrets can really stay buried for long?